about miniatures. Today's guest is author Renee Rosen, whose book, Let's Call Her Barbie, is a novel based on the incredible true life story of Ruth Handler and the creation of Barbie. It is full of more gossip, infighting, and twists and turns than the juiciest soap opera. And it's true. Let's go talk to Renee. Hi, Renee. It's so great to have you on the show.
Hi, Becky. Thank you for inviting me on.
Well, it's a pleasure having you. You are the author of Let's Call Her Barbie, about Ruth Handler, the creator of Barbie, and how Barbie came to be. And the book came out today.
Yes. So exciting.
That is exciting. So what inspired you to write this book?
I have been a lifelong Barbie fan. In fact, I think I became a writer because of all the hours of play with Barbie and creating make-believe and all that. But I wanted to write this book long before the movie came out. I was actually on a panel discussion about feminism with a woman who's very high up in the doll division at Mattel. And she told me the story of Ruth Handler. And I got goosebumps. I'm getting them again right at this very moment. And I said, oh my God, has anyone ever done a novel based on this? And she said, not that I know of. But unfortunately and fortunately, I had two other books already in the pipeline. I was working on The Social Graces and Fifth Avenue Glamour Girl. So I couldn't get to this book, to my Barbie book, until the movies started exploding. Talk about FOMO. I was in a panic. I don't know if you remember when they released the very first trailer for Barbie.
It was just everywhere.
Yeah, they weren't revealing anything about the movie until that very first trailer. And I saw Margot Robbie in that, iconic swimsuit and all the little girls smashing their baby dolls. And I thought, oh my God, it's going to be a retelling of the creation of Barbie. And thankfully, the movie went off in a much different direction. So we were safe. Whew.
That intro was powerful and interesting and really only tangentially related to the movie.
Exactly.
That's interesting. So you said you did have a Barbie growing up.
Oh, yeah.
Many Barbies?
Many Barbies. She was a constant in my life. I did not go to Steffi's house or Liz's house without my Barbie case. My friends from childhood will tell you I was a pain in the neck to play Barbies with because I had very elaborate storylines going on. Barbie and Ken can't go to Paris. First of all, they're having financial problems. And secondly, they're in the middle of a fight. And all that needed to be resolved.
No, wait, financial problems? How old were you?
I was probably, 10, 11 years old. I don't know. I would just create, all the storylines had to work for me. The motivation had to be there. The narrative arc had to be there. My friends would be like, just put on the dress and make them kiss. I was thinking, it's not that simple.
That's hilarious. It was really a tool for you to develop what would later become the storytelling that you use as an author.
Yeah, Barbie unlocked my imagination at a very young age. I just got, so engrossed in her own little storyline for whatever that day was going to be. And we had an elaborate system of picking who got which doll to play with.
Wow.
Brought our dolls and we all lined them up. Each doll got a number. Same thing with the really coveted outfits. And you drew numbers. So one day you would be Midge, and you would have Midge and an occasional G.I. Joe, and those were your dolls.
Is that the low number?
Oh, poor Midge.
I'm just saying, when you said Midge and G.I. Joe, that doesn't sound like the winning hand to me.
Yeah. Did you get, bubble cut Barbie, or did you get ponytail Barbie and all that?
And which was your favorite Barbie?
It was probably my bubble cut Barbie. She was a blonde bubble cut. When I started working on this book, I uncrated my Barbies for the first time in decades. And wow, did that bring back a flood of memories. It was just like unlocking a treasure trove.
So were some of them kind of beat up? Or did you play nice with your Barbies?
Midge had no clothes. And she's like, could I please get a pair of shoes and something to cover me up? I've been like this for 30 years. Can we show a little respect here? I had two Kens. One of my Kens is the original Ken, and unfortunately his arms don't stay in the socket anymore. And I remembered this when we were playing with him, that he would go to hug Barbie and his arms would pop out of the sockets. But he was in his original, they were like those green pants with the army fatigue short sleeve shirt. And then I had a talking Ken, but he was also flawed because when you pulled his string, his head popped off. So
oh dear.
that was one way to shut Ken up. He just didn't pull his string.
That is a major flaw.
One of my Barbies was in her airline flight attendant outfit.
So that's a really interesting point, the stewardess outfit. So I recently went to I was in London, and at the London Design Museum, they had a big Barbie exhibit.
Yeah, I heard it's fabulous.
It's fabulous. I saw Bubble Cup Barbie. I saw all kinds of Barbies. And one of the things that actually grabbed my husband's attention, he called me over to see it, was something called like Barbie Career. But it was a career game where you could pick careers for Barbie. The careers were pretty limited. It was stewardess, singer, actress, fashion model. I mean, in those three, most people can't really do. And then nurse, teacher, and mother.
Yeah.
And we were bemoaning the fact that it was so limited.
Yeah.
But then reading your book, I got a little bit of a different perception on that because there was so much reaction about Barbie having a career at all and being independent and not just being married. They wanted to marry her off and have babies.
When Ruth Handler first decided that she wanted to create an adult doll for young girls, first of all, it was met with great resistance because you cannot give a little girl a doll with breasts to play with. I mean, even her husband said this will never fly. She first discovered or really crystallized the idea for Barbie when she was in Switzerland. She was on vacation in Europe, and she saw a doll named Bild Lily, who was actually a German prostitute gag doll for men in a souvenir shop. She's like, this is what I want to do. And she brought the doll back to Mattel, and they said, you are absolutely crazy. But Ruth recognized, and fact is stranger than fiction, that while her daughter, Barbara, only had baby dolls to play with, her son, Ken, had toy soldiers and trucks and
G.I. Joe.
Well, G.I. Joe wasn't there yet.
Oh, okay.
G.I. Joe wasn't on the scene yet. But Ruth really created Barbie because she wanted to empower young girls. She wanted young girls to believe that they could do and be anything. Barbie went to the moon before Neil Armstrong got there. Whatever a man could do, Barbie could do. She had a home before women could have their own mortgage or their own credit cards.
And I love that the first Barbie dream house had no kitchen.
No kitchen. She didn't need a kitchen.
And I love the details that you have where someone wanted her to have like a Barbie vacuum cleaner. And she's like, Barbie doesn't do house cleaning chores. And I'm like, good for Barbie.
That was fun when I saw, because, Barbie took off. She initially bombed at Toy Fair. Even Sears and Roebuck wouldn't take her. They just thought this doll is indecent. Then all of a sudden, the little girls started seeing the Barbie commercial on the Mickey Mouse Club. And they were like, Mommy, I want a Barbie doll. And they finally wore their mothers down. And the Barbie sales just took off. And then everybody wanted to do business with Barbie. But when Hoover went knocking on Mattel's door and said, we want to make a little miniature vacuum cleaner for Barbie, Ruth's response was, why? What for? Barbie doesn't do housework.
And that was so smart, because I think if she had caved, in the book you say they wanted her to get married and have babies and, have vacuums. I don't think that would have had the same appeal. I think that would have killed Barbie right from the get-go.
Yeah. Ruth had a very defined vision for that doll and her legacy. The reason Ken came about was because, the fan club was writing, my Barbie's lonely. My Barbie wants a boyfriend. They all said, dolls for boys just will never work. And Ruth said, aha, but this is not a doll for boys. This is a boy doll for girls.
For the story.
Yeah.
For play acting.
They needed to have that interaction. So, she was very clear on that. But then no sooner did Ken come on the scene that they were like, when's Ken and Barbie getting married? When are they having a baby? Ruth just said, no babies. You can make wedding gowns for Barbies till the cows come home, but she's never walking down that aisle. She is not giving up her independence. Skipper, her little sister, came along because people thought Barbie was selfish, that she didn't have a baby. So it's like, okay, well, we'll make her a big sister.
That is fascinating. It is. I love this feminist view that, women can do anything and all the aspiration. But obviously there's also that she was inspired look-wise by a German porn doll.
Yeah.
It kind of encapsulates the controversy there.
Yeah, that's Barbie's DNA. But one thing that was really interesting when I was doing the research, I had the pleasure of meeting Carol Spencer, who was one of the original Barbie designers. She was 90 years old when we met. We went out to lunch, and she explained to me why Barbie had the equivalent of a 19-inch waist. It was all for the clothes. Because Barbie, if you think about it, she's 1/6 the scale of a real woman. So if Barbie were a real woman, she would be 5'9". She'd only weigh about 110, which is, we know that's
pretty skinny.
Pretty skinny. She would be wearing a size 3 shoe. If she's 1/6 the scale of a real woman, what Carol explained to me was fabric is fabric. There's no such thing as 1/6 the scale of fabric. If you remember those early Barbie clothes, the designs were so intricate. The waistbands had hook and eyes and zippers and buttons. And in order to create that all added bulk. So if Barbie had a normal size waist, she would have looked really boxy. Her hips may have been narrower than her waistline by the time they did that. So they had to create an abnormally thin waist. And that is why she wears a size 3 shoe, because if she had a size 7, that would make her look clownish. It's why her neck is so long, her head is so big. To the feminists, Ruth and the creators at Mattel, Jack Ryan and all, they never really intended for Barbie to inspire women to want to look like her. She was aspirational in the sense of independence and the ability to do whatever she wanted to do. But it was not, you're supposed to look like this. So that baffled them as much as anyone.
Well, I've really found it interesting as a miniaturist to read that in your book about the waistline and why Barbie is designed the way she did. Because I have to admit, one of the arguments against Barbie is always like, oh, well, she doesn't have real proportions. But as a miniaturist, that's often true. When you reduce things to 1/112 or to Barbie scale, you can't always reduce them proportionally or it looks funny. I mean, you start with that and then you adjust.
Yeah.
So that really gave me a whole new way of seeing her when I read about that.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I understand now.
Yeah. It's a lot of optical illusion in Barbie. If we had Barbie's proportions, I don't think we could hold our head up. They are
Right.
too long and too narrow. But she wouldn't have that elegant sort of hourglass figure if her proportions were something that we would consider normal for a normal, healthy woman.
Right. And miniatures often struggle with fabric because it is hard to get fabric that's thin enough. Like for a leather sofa, we always look for the cheapest leather synthetic because it's really thin.
Yeah.
So that makes sense.
Yes. And from a miniaturist perspective, that fabric, they had to create their own fabric designs to find a repeat pattern that was small enough scale for Barbie. That just didn't exist. A houndstooth or even thread. Even thread would be like, it would be like a rope.
Oh, did they create different thread? Do you know?
To get the thinnest threads, the stitching had to change to make, if they did any sort of decorative pipe stitching, all that had to be worked out. There were no buttons. There were no zippers that size. All that was created. That was Charlotte Johnson, who was the very first Barbie designer that Ruth brought on. She spent a lot of time over in Japan. There was no one in the United States that could manufacture this. So she and Jack Ryan spent a great deal of time in Japan just getting the operations worked out and the logistics so that they could mass produce this doll.
That's the other thing I was really surprised about in your book is how long and how many mechanical and engineering feats there were to creating Barbie.
Oh yeah, she had never been created before. And Bill Lilly, her ancestor, the porn star, the plastic that the Germans used was very hard. Ruth wanted something that was softer. All the makeup, Barbie's eyeshadow, her lipstick, her nail polish, all that had to be done by hand. The rooting in the hair to find the right kind of synthetic hair that would look and feel like real hair and could be rooted without deteriorating or without coming out or whatever. That was a challenge. Just finding the right plastic was a challenge. When the very first prototypes of Barbie came in, there was a language barrier between, the Japanese and the Americans. So Jack Ryan would go over there with an interpreter, and somehow it was lost in translation, and Barbie comes back with nipples.
I saw that.
It says no nipples. And Jack Ryan took out a pocket knife and just basically sawed them off, sent them back. Barbie, the original prototypes also came back where she looked like she was Japanese. She looked Asian. She did not look, like an American doll. And then there were problems with her hands and her toes. The plastic wasn't going all the way down into the molds. So they would uncrate a new shipment of prototypes, and Barbie would only have 2 digits on her hand, and the rest were left in the mold. It took a lot of really innovative engineering to make her come to life like that. There were many, many hurdles for them to overcome.
Well, I understand the makeup and the hair because the baby dolls didn't have that, but they couldn't use the same plastic or things as they did for baby dolls.
They wanted something that was a little bit more pliable, softer.
Okay.
And the plastic they used for baby dolls, because baby dolls were larger.
Right.
Barbie was tiny and intricate, and they needed a plastic that would be liquefied enough to go down into the molds, into those to get all that, and then harden to the right consistency. That's why she kept falling apart in the molds. They would pull her out, and it's like, half her hand is stuck in the mold. So poor Barbie, she had a hard time. It was a hard labor for her.
I see that. And I do love what you were referring to earlier, that it was really the little girls themselves and Ruth's decision to spend a ton of money for the time and for a company on the advertising to sort of bypass everyone else and go right to the little girl. And some of that was based on the fact that when they did sort of interviews with products, the little girls liked it, but the moms weren't sure. Is that right?
Oh, the mothers were pretty opposed to the whole concept of, let my little girl stay a little girl. And I don't want her to have this doll with breasts. And of course, when the little girls first saw Barbie, one of the first things they all did immediately was undress her. They wanted to see what was going on under there.
And that probably didn't help.
That did not help the mothers, be okay with this. But, the other thing too, and Ruth was always a gambler, toys were only advertised the 2 weeks before Christmas. That was it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they did not advertise toys any other time of the year. This was the spring. Barbie launched at Toy Fair in March 9th, 1959, and was met with very, very harsh criticism. Nobody took orders for her. And it was a question, well, are we going to cancel the TV campaign that we have planned to air on the Mickey Mouse Club? Or are we going to cut our losses and just accept that the doll didn't work? And Ruth is like, no, I can't accept that. And so she went ahead, and it was like $500,000, which was a ton of money for a company like Mattel back then. They went ahead and aired the TV commercials. And when those little girls saw Barbie, that was all it took.
That's amazing. She knew what little girls wanted. She just had to get through the dads and the businessmen and the moms.
But ironically, Ruth herself was a tomboy. She never played with dolls. She didn't play with anything. She was working from the time she was, like 9 years old at her sister's store. She had no inner child.
She did have ambition. She wanted something in her life in addition to motherhood.
absolutely. She was not going to ever be content to stay home. She was a horrendous cook and a housekeeper. She was horrible. That was never going to be enough for her. Although, her daughter greatly resented that. She wanted a mom who was going to stay home and bake cookies and be there when she got home from school. She wanted a mother that was like her friends' mothers.
In the book, you talk a little bit about Ruth and the persona she tried to create so she would be respected by men. And she also seemed to like dressing nice and like her clothes. Is Ruth, in some little sense, Barbie?
That's a really good question. I think Ruth knew intuitively, and her sister was her mentor, that as a woman in business in a man's world, which the toy industry was predominantly male-oriented, she had to walk a fine line between being feminine and being tough as nails. Sometimes she crossed that line. She talked like a truck driver. She was crass. She was kind of a rough and tumble girl. She was petite. She was like 5'2". But I think she knew, like, I always have to have my lipstick on. I have to use my femininity in a way that opens the door for these men. And then when they're not expecting it, I'm going to clobber them. I think it was more that than it was Barbie. If anything, Barbie was more designed after Charlotte Johnson, that first designer. Barbie's hands, the original Barbie's hands, were shaped after Charlotte's fingers. And Charlotte was a model. Charlotte was this tall, slender, very attractive woman. So I think, if anything, Barbie was more based on her. In fact, I think it was Ruth's son, Ken, when he met Charlotte, said, "Oh, she's just like Barbie."
That's great. And it was really Ruth's business mind that wanted to promote the clothes so much, right? Because everyone thought the doll was the point. She's like, no, what's really going to get us the money is the clothes. They'll keep buying the clothes. That's what I loved about Barbie. All the outfits, mixing and matching, figuring out what she would wear to what. Some of those clothes are really iconic.
Oh, absolutely. I'm super excited because in the back of the book, we have exclusive photos of those iconic outfits. I talk about them in the book and how they were created and all that. But then when you get to the end, you'll actually be able to see them. So I'm really excited to share that with readers.
Oh, I didn't see that in my advanced copy.
It's not in the ARC. It's in the finished books.
Okay.
Both in the hardcover and the paperback.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, I'll have to be sure to see those. I know it's a fictionalized account, but you have Charlotte feeling like she's not really a fashion designer because A, she didn't finish school, and B, she works on clothes. But arguably, Barbie's influence in fashion is real. Did she really feel that way? Did it take her a while to realize what a success she was?
I think you're referring to Stevie.
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. I'm referring to Stevie.
And Stevie is a fictional character.
Yes.
I think that Barbie's success and the phenomenon that she became, nobody really saw that coming. And then when people like Bob Mackie and Yves Saint Laurent wanted to design for her, suddenly everyone wanted to dress Barbie. So if you were a Barbie designer, that was a pretty coveted position. You were not just a toy designer. You were not making baby dolls and clothes. Charlotte went to all the fashion shows in Paris to see what was coming out. What was Givenchy doing? What were those hot latest looks? They fashioned outfits on Jackie Kennedy when she was first lady because she was such a fashion icon. So Barbie always kept in step with the latest trends. When they introduced the Francie doll, which was Barbie's mod cousin, she was a vehicle for those fashions coming out of Carnaby Street, and, the mod look.
But it had to be a risk in the very beginning. Charlotte had to think, what is this doing to my fashion design career?
Oh, absolutely, because she had her own fashion line. She was kind of a hotshot on 7th Avenue in New York when she went out there to work on Barbie. Was she going to be looked at? And Stevie went through this too, trying to break in as a fashion designer. Are people going to look down their nose at me like, oh, you're making doll clothes? In reality, they were making some of the most advanced and cutting edge fashions that were out there. And it was much harder to make them as a miniature, so you can appreciate this. It's really hard to work in that tiny scale.
Yes, it is. And when I went to the exhibit at the London Design Museum, they had quite a few clothes. And so many of those clothes, even though they're obviously kind of period pieces, but they really hold up. Some of those pieces they'll just be beautiful forever.
Yeah. Yeah, those gowns and all, they were just such classic designs and timeless.
Yes, absolutely. Some of those little clothing sets where you had the whole little set with the poodle skirt and the purse.
Yep. And the hat and the gloves, like all the accessories. The little pocketbooks had to have lining. They weren't just for show. They had to be functional and yet simple enough that let's say a 6-year-old little girl could play with them, could get the clothes on. The size of the sleeve had to be a certain length so that Barbie's hand could get through it easily.
So is that part real in your book, that they originally designed some of the clothes and they couldn't get the hands through it?
Yeah. I mean, this is one thing that I think readers, when they get to the end, I think they'll be surprised by how much of this book is actually true. The thing with Jack Ryan, and we can talk about him, what a fun character he was to work with. And all the shenanigans that went on at Mattel after Barbie's debut, all that happened.
Yes, I looked at your note at the end and it was very instructive. I mean, in one way it's surprising, but in another way, when something's groundbreaking, there's always going to be drama, right?
Ruth's daughter was Barbara. Jack's wife was Barbara. They both claimed that they created Barbie. Now, Ruth was not an engineer. She was not a designer. Jack Ryan was a genius engineer. He had worked for Raytheon. He was an aerospace guy that came over to Mattel. He was the one that figured out how, from an engineering standpoint, how to recreate this doll. And he was the one that went over to Japan and did the legwork. So he felt he had bragging rights, said, I created Barbie. But then Ruth said, no, I created Barbie. She was named after my daughter. No, she was named after my wife. And the two of them butted heads constantly over that. And then a big royalty situation, which I don't want to give away too many spoilers.
Right. But even if he built it, to me, it was the idea of Barbie.
Yeah.
That's groundbreaking. And I guess I tend to give Ruth the credit for that.
Yeah. And then the makers of Build Lily would say, not so fast. So it was.
Yes, but that wasn't the idea of Barbie. I mean, it may have been an adult doll.
Right.
But to me, the idea of Barbie is an aspirational woman who can be anything, do anything, go anywhere, have her own car, have her own house. And Build Lily was not that.
Right. And putting that doll in the hands of those little girls and of those children was genius.
Right. That is true. But yes, it is fascinating in the book how much infighting there is, how much, even though Ruth's risk paid off over and over again, she still had to fight for everything she had.
Everything. It's like, are you going to trust me now? I was right about Barbie all along. That was part of her being a woman. It was part of the company growing at such a fast pace. And the egos, they all considered themselves artists and geniuses. It's hard to encapsulate all that, under one roof without some infighting going on.
Yes, so we kind of hinted at it, but tell us a little bit how you came up with the title of your book, Let's Call Her Barbie.
So originally, I had called it The Doll Makers. And it was actually my publisher that said, because, I was finishing up the book. I don't know if the movie was out yet, but, Barbie was everywhere. And they said, we really think you need to have Barbie in the title. You say Barbie, everybody knows who you're talking about. She doesn't need a last name. So we went through a bunch of iterations. I think it was like 2 or 3 people that at the same time sort of came up with Let's Call Her Barbie. I was like, okay, that must be a sign.
Yeah, it's a great title. And there's a great story in there about how hard it was for them to find a name. And of course, the name is so iconic. It's important.
And I did take a little bit of creative license with the naming. And I say yes and no to that, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, because in my research, there's a lot of conflicting information. One was that they wanted to call it the Barbara doll, then they wanted to call it the Babs doll. Those names were taken. According to Ruth, they came up with it really quickly, and that her daughter Barbara's nickname was Barbie. But of course, Barbara Handler did not want any association with the doll at all. If you called her Barbie, you better take cover.
So basically, Barbie and Ken, one could say, were named after her kids, Barbara and Ken, but neither one of them wanted anything to do with the dolls.
Nope. Barbara wanted to be a wife and mother. She wanted to be what her mother was not. All she wanted to do was get married and have children and raise them in a way that she felt she wasn't raised. Her mother was never there. Her mother was always at the office, always working. And Barbara Handler, she didn't want to recreate that at all. And then Ken just thought that Barbie was so materialistic and superficial. And he just, even though he had the childhood that he had because of Barbie, she afforded him a really, really nice lifestyle of privilege, but he did not like it. He hated being Ken. I mean, both the kids were like, ew, I'm dating my brother, Mom. So
they did not like that.
They did not like it at all.
Let's talk a little bit about this Jack Ryan. So tell everyone who he is and why he's such a crazy character in the book.
So Jack Ryan was the head engineer at Mattel. As I mentioned earlier, they brought him over from Raytheon, where he was making Hawk missiles. He was working with the Pentagon. Jack Ryan went to Yale. I'll give away a little secret about Jack Ryan that is revealed relatively early in the book. He was severely dyslexic. He was bipolar. He was a sex addict. He was an alcoholic. He was 5'5", 5'8" with his 3-inch elevator shoes. He was the heartthrob of Mattel. The women went gaga for this guy. They loved him. No one could resist. The only people that could resist Jack Ryan's charms were Ruth Handler and Charlotte Johnson. He slept his way through the secretarial pool. Supposedly he and his wife had an understanding. He buys, with his Barbie royalties, he buys a mansion in Bel Air right next to Zsa Zsa Gabor, and he turns it into a castle. And he hosts up to about 25 parties a month at the castle that were on a par with Hugh Hefner's Playboy mansion parties. Lots of decadence, lots of drugs, lots of sex. He was a tragic character because he was a genius. He was charming. He was charismatic. He really appreciated women, even though he tried to, turn some women into living Barbie dolls. He always felt that women were smarter than men. I could not have dreamed up a better character. And in an early draft, Jack Ryan took up all the space in every scene. They said, ooh, I think you need to tone down Jack because he's eclipsing Ruth. He's eclipsing all the female characters. And I said, I will bring the women up, but I will not bring Jack down. As a result, I think it made the women more dimensional. It served the book because I just couldn't see toning Jack down. I mean, that's who he was.
Well, it's so interesting that you say that because my guess is that's part of why Ruth couldn't get along with him. She was so determined and he was so larger than life, and he probably did suck all the oxygen out of the room.
Yeah, he had that charm about him that Ruth could turn on, but it wasn't really as natural for her. Yeah, he was tortured. He was a tortured genius. He was the epitome of a mad genius. Ruth, being a woman, her name wasn't even on the door. Mattel was a combination of the very first partner that her husband had, a guy named Harold Matson. So he was Matt, and her husband was Elliot. So Matt and Elle made Mattel. Meanwhile, even in those early days, Ruth was the engine. Ruth was the one going out and selling those early toys. They started making plastic picture frames. There would have been no Mattel without Ruth. That's just an absolute fact. And yet her name wasn't on the door.
I'm sitting here shaking my head. The listeners, you can't see it, but that's just so frustrating.
Yeah. And I think that was always a sore spot with her. She felt like I need to roar a little bit because people don't even know I'm here otherwise. And I'm the engine behind all this.
Yes. So the idea that Jack wanted women to look like Barbie, I mean, that's disturbing in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, really in every way.
There's a lot you can read about Jack Ryan and the things that he did in real life, paying for surgeries and all that. As a young boy, his father was doing something with Radio City Music Hall. He snuck into the orchestra pit when the Rockettes were rehearsing. And there was something about that kick line that I think really shaped his life, and his outlook on women.
Wow.
I'm not defending it, God knows. Disturbing doesn't even begin to describe. But then there was this other side to him that you could almost understand how he got there. It was tragic.
You kind of downplayed that in the book.
I did because I thought it would be so unpalatable.
Yes.
One of the books that I used for research was Toy Monster by Jerry Oppenheimer. That was some of my source material. He calls him the father of Barbie. When the Barbie movie came out, there was a lot written about Jack Ryan. And did he get credit for Barbie? Did he not get credit for Barbie? Was he a monster? He was certainly a disturbed man. He had so many demons. But I didn't want that to
take over the book.
Yeah, I needed to find the right balance between a book that would be fun and enjoyable and bring back nostalgia and fond memories for people and entertain. The story of Barbie, fact is stranger than fiction. I wanted to focus on that, not so much that dark side, because that was certainly going on at Mattel, but that wasn't Barbie.
Oh, I understand. I mean, this is Ruth's story and Barbie's story. You keep going on with too much Jack, and it takes away from that.
Yeah, it would overpower the whole story, and Jack could be his own novel.
He really could be.
Right. And that's why, in terms of the whole book, I think that people will be really surprised when they get to the end to see how much of this, like, oh my God, that really happened? I thought she made that up. No, that really happened?
So much of it is really true. I'm really glad you did that because that's one thing I always want to know. And I immediately was like, okay, what's real? And really, so much of it is. And that makes it even more fascinating.
Exactly. That's why when the story was first conveyed to me, I was just like, I was on fire about it. And then the more I dug into the history of Mattel and the history of Barbie, I was like, this just keeps getting better and better. Oh my God. I just could not wait to write this book. It was a joy. I miss my characters so much.
Well, it was a joy to read too. And one thing as a member of the miniatures community that I loved is that you have a shout out to some of the social media Barbie influencers, one of which is my very good friend, Tanya at Grandma Gets Real.
I didn't even know that there was such a thing as Barbie influencers. And, and I list them in the back of the book because if you just want to have a smile on your face every day, go look at their feeds. Their posts and their videos are so charming. It's just amazing what they can do. Grandma Gets Real. I just love her videos. I love the world that she's created.
They're just pure joy.
Yes, exactly. And boy, do we need that now more than ever.
We really do. Sometimes I'll go to my miniature feed and it just always cheers me up. It's one of the reasons I love doing miniatures is the joy it brings and the sense that it's this other world.
There is something about that scale, whether it's 112 or 1/6. It's like babies and puppies. They just warm our hearts to see, like Tanya with the little ice cubes.
She's famous for her little ice cubes, right?
Yeah.
And every time I see them, I'm intrigued.
Yes.
Every single thing is cuter and mini.
Yeah.
One thing that struck me that Barbie doesn't do any cleaning is, when I'm doing my reels, I actually look for things that I can interact with. And so I do end up with some cleaning stuff, a little vacuum, little feather duster.
Yeah.
I just got a little Swiffer. And of course, the irony is, like Ruth, I'm not a big cleaner in real life. Stuff that would not be cute or fun in real life is exactly that in miniature.
Yeah. And if you just need a break from this big, oversized world that we're a part of, just go look at those feeds, your feed, all those feeds. They are heartwarming.
Well, I think you have to find the joy where you can. You have to follow your joy, whether it's writing a book or doing miniatures or whatever, right?
Yep. We all need escape.
We do. It's really important. I think sometimes we don't give enough value to that. We give value to exercising and to having a side hustle and to working hard. But we don't always just give ourselves permission to be creative for the sake of being creative.
Yeah. It's so interesting you say that, because when I first started researching, I went to a Barbie collectors convention, the national convention. I had no idea how many adults were collecting Barbie. It's such a wonderful creative outlet for people. It's really a wonderful expression for them, a way to express themselves.
Yes.
And everybody's feed focuses on something a little different. Like Dolls on the Brain, he's just funny. His posts they just make me laugh. And some of the others are more about retro Barbie, or Grandma Gets Real. She does some Barbie and some miniature. And so she goes back and forth. It's a really fun, creative outlet that, more and more people, I think, are discovering.
Yes. So my big idea is I have an Apple Watch and it keeps track of your walking. I want a creativity tracker. Because I feel in our society, things aren't important until you measure them.
Yeah.
But anyway, so it's been so delightful having you on the show. I loved your book. It was just fascinating. I could identify with Ruth sometimes. By training, I'm a lawyer. And when I went to law school, only a third of the class were women. And I was constantly being mistaken for a secretary.
Yep.
I really identified with her and her sort of struggle to be heard.
In many ways, she got the short end of the stick. She triumphed in the end.
Where can we get your book? Is it just everywhere?
Everywhere. Your favorite indie bookstores. If you don't have an indie bookstore near you, or a Barnes & Noble, you can order online. It should be widely available.
So it's called Let's Call Her Barbie by Renee Rosen. And it's a delightful read. I think you'll really enjoy it. Thanks again, Oh, I almost called you Ruth. Thanks again, Renee.
Thanks, Becky. This was fun.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
I really enjoyed talking to Renee, and I loved her book, and I recommend you grab yourself a copy. My next podcast is out in February and features the amazing Marina, who is on Instagram as Deck to Farm Charm. We'll discuss a special mini surprise she built for pop star Meghan Trainor, tips on making minis your full-time job, and much more. Till then, remember, you're the one in charge of your dollhouse, so do what you want. Make yourself happy, and the rest of your life will fall into place. See you on Instagram. Goodbye.